Rick Shu here, friends from work. Star Wars Celebration has wrapped. I have some thoughts. Stay tuned.
Everybody come on, let's get down. Get down.
Thank you, Freak Base. So Rick Shu here, friends from work. So Star Wars Celebration has wrapped, and this is not necessarily a recap of said celebration per se. In fact, Courtney and Brian and I have our most recent podcast that's up on iTunes, YouTube, everywhere you get great podcasts, and we discuss day 2 and day 1 of celebration. Today was day 3. Happy Easter for those that celebrate, by the way. But one of the things that struck me as I was on my walk today, I was walking around my neighborhood and I was thinking about celebration. I'd watched the Obi-Wan panel. I'd watched some highlights of some things that I missed over the last couple of days as well. And something dawned on me. Star Wars is leaps and bounds my favorite franchise. Now, Batman's my favorite fictional character. If you know me, you know this. But Star Wars as a franchise is my favorite cinematic franchise of all time. Unfortunately, one thing that Star Wars has is a lot of toxic negativity comes from the fandom that's predominantly the online fandom, right? So these hashtags and these tweets and things that are negative all the time and the anti-Disney rhetoric and whatnot, that's not real life, right? So much of that is just coming from online fandom, which is like a subculture within a subculture within a subculture. The problem is that they have a very large microphone now, which is Twitter and Facebook and things of that nature. And so their voices are amplified. And so there's a lot of negativity that surrounds this franchise. So, growing up the way I did, I saw the original film in the theaters on its re-release when it was A New Hope before Empire Strikes Back came out, or maybe it was right after. I can't remember exactly the timeline, but Star Wars was re-released. So it was episode 4, right? Because once it made money and was successful, then Lucas was like, cool, then I can now do what I want to do here. And Empire Strikes Back will be episode 5 and we'll confuse the hell out of everybody. But I saw the original film in the theater, and then I saw Empire Strikes Back, and I've seen every movie in the theater since. And I remember as an adult when the special editions came out, how the uproar and divisiveness and toxic behavior of fandom then. And I think back going, my God, what if they had Twitter? And then the prequels came. And we live now in this revisionist world where the prequels are embraced and beloved, and that's great. I'm glad that they are. But let's get real. The most divisive time in my life as a Star Wars fan was during the prequels. The reason that the prequels were even more toxic than the sequel trilogy is because at least the sequel trilogy hit on certain cylinders, right? So, for instance, even The Last Jedi, which I love, by the way, was very critically acclaimed, and general audiences like it. If you look at Cinema Score, I think it's an A. Maybe it was an A minus, but I think it's an A. And critics loved it. The online fandom group were split, and that split, the ones that hated it really hated it, and they amplified their hatred, and it became the narrative, right? But that divisiveness was even worse in the prequels because critics also hated those films, and really anyone over like 21 years old basically didn't like those films very much, or they hated them, especially the first one and probably the second one. The third one had some redemption to it from both the critics and from fans, but overall those were very divisive. In fact, the backlash of those films ultimately pushed George out of his own franchise. I mean, let's face it, guys, he sold it to Disney to get the fuck out. I mean, just to be blunt, so pardon my French here, but just to get out. He didn't want to be a part of it anymore. He said so. And so there's a lot of history with the toxic behavior, and the problem is now is that it's rewarded with the ghetto gutter, and I won't name names, but there are a couple in particular that are so terrible, and they profit off the hate. They're the YouTube faction of this Star Wars hatred vitriol. It's tied into some politics. I'm sorry, but it just is. And And it's very unfortunate because it doesn't seem to be going away because too many people are making money off that nonsense, off that hate, off that divisiveness, off that negativity. How many times do you guys see people complaining about Star Wars online and they apparently hate everything of the Disney era? Like, well, what are you doing here? Why are you still talking about it? We're a decade plus into this by now. There's been multiple films, lots of animation. We've got live action on D plus. What are you doing here? They're here for the attention. They're here for the clicks. They're here to feed the monster, which is the trash YouTube faction of Star Wars fandom. But the point to this video is I want to dispel some of that bullshit. And I want to just give a positive message as a fan, a lifelong fan. So when The Force Awakens came out, I was very excited, as we all were, to have the original cast back. And Disney, with Lucasfilm, made a very conscious decision that this new trilogy was going to be akin to the original trilogy, more practical sets, more zippy hoorah, hey, kind of that Han Solo balance, that human balance that we didn't get in the prequels. And by the way, I love the prequels, especially now in retrospect, but they are very sterile and they're kind of drab, and everybody talks like they're lawyers. That's how the Jedi talked. Even with Natalie Portman, which was a human being, Lucas made the same mistake with her as he did with Carrie Fisher, in that he gave her some weird accent. And I don't mean her decoy. I'm talking about Queen Amidala and A Phantom Menace. And much like he did with Carrie Fisher, you watch the first 20 minutes of Star Wars A New Hope, Carrie Fisher's talking with like a British accent, then it just goes away. And one of the first lines I think that she says where she doesn't have the accent is, "Ben Kenobi, where is he?" Which justifies Leia's presence in Obi-Wan, but that's a conversation for another day. But anyway, to my larger point here is that the even Natalie Portman wasn't there to offset the rigidness of the prequels. And so it was quite obvious that the direction they were going in was almost anti-prequel. And when The Force Awakens came out, I think there was some underrated references or missed references to the prequel era that I think should have been noted, but I don't want to go down that rabbit hole. But we cannot deny the fact that you couldn't find merchandise. They weren't celebrated at celebrations. They weren't talked about. They were sort of shunned. You even had Adam Driver. He didn't know he was on camera, but he was talking to some firemen, I think, in New York, right around Force Awakens coming out. They're like, "Hey man, is this gonna be better than the prequels?" He's like, "Yeah, of course." He was just, playing the part. He didn't know he was on camera. That was an unfortunate thing. But I think that pissed off a lot of prequel era fans that were kids when those films came out. I was not. I was already in my 20s, because it was made for them. And it was just apparent that the prequel era was toxic, and we're going to kind of forget about it. And we're going to take the original trilogy, and then the sequel trilogy, we're going to build on that. To Rian Johnson's credit, and The Last Jedi, there was a lot more prequel stuff in there. I mean, Luke telling Rey all about Darth Sidious and the fall of the Jedi was like recapping the freaking prequels, man. That was such a cool scene. So that was a good nod. And then the divisiveness of that movie, I would say, in a weird way, ultimately was a blessing, because if you love the film like I do, it's still there to exist. And I would also argue that The Rise of Skywalker is a compliment to that movie. And I don't care what anybody says, I'll die on that hill. But it is. But aside from that, if you have to look for a silver lining, one of the things about the divisiveness of The Last Jedi was, after that, it seemed that the prequel era was sort of, I think Lucasfilm, I don't have any insight on this, by the way, it's just my educated guess as a lifelong fan and observer of this stuff. I think Lucasfilm said, let's put our arms around the prequels. I don't think we realized how important those films are to the people that are in their 20s now, that were teenagers and small children when those came out. That was their Star Wars. And the original trilogy was, their Star Wars. Prequel trilogy with their Star Wars. Let's try to make this where it's everybody's. And from that moment on, and it appears that Lucasfilm obviously really leaned into the prequels, if you look at Rise of Skywalker and you look at that last duel with Rey and Kylo, that mirrors Obi-Wan and Anakin completely in Revenge of the Sith. I mean, it's fire and water. That's purpose. It's Duel of Fates. It's the choreography. I mean, that's the first time outside of the prequels from the original trilogy, other than Luke's flip, and he does a couple flips in Empire and Return of the Jedi. But if you maybe lay that they fight in the prequels, it's very very choreographed, and it's almost like they're dancing, right, as opposed to like this kind of visceral battle, which we very much got between Rey and Kylo and Force Awakens. And then I like the stuff with Luke and Kylo at the end of Last Jedi too, by the way, and obviously the Snoke scene with the guards, awesome. But if you look at that fight in Rise of Skywalker, that's the prequels. And then what do we have since then? Think about it. Think about Clone Wars. Think about the Obi-Wan series that has Hayden Christensen coming back. He was so toxic to fans that I never thought he would. I wanted him to, but I didn't actually think they'd do it. It was just kind of more wishful thinking. And they were able to redeem him to the fans of the original trilogy that might not like the prequels. Anyway, my larger point is this. And if you look at the last episode of Mandalorian, by the way, that's a big giant love letter to the prequels. Anybody that loves the prequels, I don't understand how you don't like that last episode of the Mandalorian. I just don't. I'm sorry, I don't. It's like that's what it is. But one of the things, and then this is my final point, because I'm going to send a positive message. One of the things I really notice about this celebration for me is how all the eras of Star Wars now are just all under one umbrella. I mean, with canon, of course they were, but I just mean in terms of symbolism and the way they're being honored by Lucasfilm. I mean, look at Star Wars Celebration, right? Look at the stuff that we got. We have this Obi-Wan panel today, Easter Sunday, with Ewan McGregor and Hayden Christensen. Like, just think about that for a second, right? The show's run its course. I think we're going to, on a side note, I think we're going to see both of them again. I think we'll definitely see Hayden Christensen, Ahsoka, but I think we're going to see Ewan McGregor again as well. And I hope we do. I hope I'm right. But in the same, under the same, roof, you had the sequel trilogy panel yesterday, right? And you had Emperor Palpatine, you had Snoke, all under one roof to talk about the villains of the sequel trilogy. The first live action movie that we're going to get post Rise of Skywalker is Rey. And Rey is back. And yes, damn it, it's awesome. And anybody that says that, well, the sequel trilogy were a failure, like, no, they weren't. They might be in this bubble online bullshit chatter, but not in real life. Those films are largely critically acclaimed. They're all $1 billion plus. It's a very hard barometer when you have a juggernaut like The Force Awakens that does over $2 billion to compare it to that. But it was a success. And the way they pulled off that movie, quite frankly, with the online backlash of The Last Jedi, also with the death of Carrie Fisher, like J.J. Abrams should win a freaking award for pulling that film off and landing that ship. I think it's very underrated. I love The Rise of Skywalker. I love the sequel trilogy, period. But they're all there. And obviously the OT never goes away, right? That's home base. That's the core. That's the heart of, that's the backbone of all of it. So that's there. It always will be. But it was just so cool. And I don't care what the bullshit YouTube grifters say. I don't care what the toxic fandom says. This is perhaps truly the golden age of Star Wars, because the content that we're getting, I largely love. Some things I like better than others, but I largely really like, at least. Even Solo, which I think is kind of a boring film that's very forgettable, is not a bad movie. It's not. I can watch it and enjoy it. So that's like worst case scenario for me. And that's amazing. It's kind of like Solo's like the Phantom Menace to me. It's there. It serves its purpose. A lot of things I enjoy about it. I can watch it. But it's just a great damn time to be a fan, guys. And I want us to all appreciate that and kind of take it in, right? And let's be positive. Doesn't mean we got to like everything. Of course not. It's okay not to. I understand why some people didn't like this last episode of Mandalorian. I loved it, but I get it. That's a hard one to defend. It's weird. But even with that, that show is largely embraced by fans. And that's cool because that's very rare in Star Wars these days. And hopefully it'll maintain that. But that's all I wanted to share, guys. Not so much the play-by-play of everything that happened at Celebration. It just really hit me today that we're living in a time where all three trilogies are now equally embraced. Lucasfilm is honoring them in different ways with film, TV. I mean, the Obi-Wan show, the stuff we're getting in Mandalorian, Ahsoka is going to have cool stuff in it from like Rebels, but not just that. I mean, just all of it. And then obviously getting Rey back is freaking phenomenal. So let's enjoy it. Let's enjoy the ride. I mean, as a Batman fan, it's some of the best times to be alive with Batman as well. We got Michael Keaton coming back. The Matt Reeves stuff is awesome. We're gonna have a great spinoff with Colin Farrell's Penguin and the Batman sequel. Like, I thought the Nolan trilogy was the best era for Batman outside of maybe the summer of '89, but I think we're entering it now with Batman, and we're definitely here with Star Wars. And I just hope everybody understands that and embraces it. Because if you look at Celebration and you look at all the content and you look at all the different facets of Star Wars being represented and honored and continuing on and tying all together, like, it is fucking awesome. That's all I want to say. May the force be with you. On behalf of Rick, Courtney, and Brian, thanks for supporting Friends from Work. This was just my little YouTube rant on Easter Sunday. Sorry for the profanity. Happy Easter. Terrible segue, I know, but happy Easter. And we'll talk to you soon. Over and out.